All right, here we go. This week's Torah portion is Parshas Vayigash. Vayigash, it comes from the first verse of the portion, Vayigash Elav Yehuda, and Yehuda, Judah, approached him. Who did he approach? Yosef, his brother Yosef, Joseph. Didn't know it was his brother at the time, of course. What had happened is that the last week's Torah portion ended off with Joseph had ordered his servant to put his special silver cup goblet into Benjamin's sack. And when they left, the brothers left from buying the grain because of the famine. He sent a servant after them. They found it, and Benjamin was busted, and they all went back down to Egypt. And Joseph said, "Okay, you guys could all go. I'm just going to keep him here." And Yehuda, who is often acting as leader of the brothers, and also as the one who had staked his portion in the world to come on Binyamin's return, which was the only way he was able to get his father Yaakov to allow them, the brothers, to bring Binyamin down with them, right? Because Yosef had said, "Don't even bother coming if you don't bring him," and Yaakov was like, "No way am I sending him. I'm not risking any more sons." So Yehuda is the one who stands up and he's like, no. So he speaks up to Yosef and he says, "Okay, listen. We did everything that you asked of us. And even the things that you asked us, these arbitrary questions that had nothing to do with anything, we came to buy grain. That's all we came for. And then first you accuse us of being spies. You start like, oh, do you have a father? Do you have a brother?" You start asking these questions that have nothing to do with anything. Like, we're not looking to marry, like, are you coming to marry our daughters? We're not looking to marry your sister. Why are you asking all these questions of us? And basically the punchline is, you're not keeping him. So if I have to fight you, I will. And even if I'm going to go down for it, I'll take you first. And at this point, Yosef realizes that his brothers had fully repented from having sold him, and he can't contain himself any longer. He has everybody but the brothers, of course, leave the room. Also because when he was going to reveal himself to his brothers, he didn't want them to be ashamed in front of anybody else. So he had them leave the room, and he breaks down in loud weeping. And say the whole household heard him. And he's crying. And then he tells the brothers the big iconic words, "Ani Yosef ha'odavichai," I am Yosef, is my father still alive? Right? And not just, obviously he knew he was alive, but like, is he living? Is he well? Is everything, all that kind of stuff. And the brothers are initially embarrassed. They shrink from him. But Yosef tells them, and it's confounding how the depth and the perspective that Yosef has, is that he tells them, don't be ashamed, don't be, realize that I am here because God sent me here. The brothers acted as the messengers in all this, but it was not you who sold me, it was God who decreed that I should come down here so that ultimately I could provide for everyone. And this is, also just take a side note, this is obviously a very huge lesson in our outlook on the world, is that yes, God has many messengers, so there are many different ways that things could come about. So for ourselves, we pray that we should be messengers for good for other people, but also for ourselves, when things occur to us, it's God's will that these occur. And so just, okay, it's me, and now quickly go tell our father that I'm alive. Go, let's not wait any longer. Just get the news over to him. He also then he embraces his brother Benjamin. Another interesting thing. So first he embraces Binyamin, and the two of them, they cry on each other's, let's say they cry on each other's necks, but they cry on each other's shoulders. So it's like Rashi, foremost commentator of the Torah, says, what are they crying about? They're crying about the future destruction of the temples that they saw that would occur. The Beis HaMikdash, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, stood in Benjamin's portion. And the tabernacle, once the Jewish people came to the land of Israel, before the Beis HaMikdash was built, it was in Shiloh, right? In Shiloh. So that was in Yosef's portion. And that would be destroyed at one point, and the two holy temples would also be destroyed. So they were crying over the future destructions that they saw. And of course the question is, why are they crying over each other? They could be crying over their own. Well, because when it comes to somebody else, we have compassion, we pray, we cry, we do all that. But we can only do so much for them, because ultimately the decisions and choices lie within ourselves. So they're not crying over their own, what was going to occur in their own portion, because that they got to take care of to the best they can. We got to act, we got to do something about this. But for somebody else, it's not just a matter of like, well, you got to do what you got to do, and that's it. Somebody else, that then we could cry. Now and then he says, okay, we're gonna get word over to Pharaoh, to Paro. We're gonna tell him, and Paro also says, yeah, go send for your father, bring your whole family here. We want everybody to be here. Then Joseph then gives his brothers gifts. He gives Benjamin extra gifts, 300 silver coins and all these things. Pharaoh sends 10 animals laden with grain. So it's a lot, but it's not going to be enough that it's not going to entice them to move now to Egypt, because he wants them to all move, the rest of the Jacobson clan to move to Egypt. And Yosef sent 10 male donkeys laden with delicacies from Egypt, which it says aged wine and split beans. So apparently that's a thing. And also 10 female donkeys also laden with grain. And he sent them in these wagons that when Yaakov first heard the news of like, hey, guess what? Guess what, Father? Joseph is still alive. We found him in Egypt, and he's running the show down there. He didn't believe it initially, because after all these years of mourning, they've been separated for 22 years. And after all these years, he couldn't fathom it, and he couldn't handle the information then. And then when he saw the wagons, they were very deliberately done. The commentators say it was a hint, because the word in Hebrew for wagon is agalah, and that's the same letters as eglah, which means a calf. And it was a hint to the last Torah subject that Joseph had learned with Yaakov, with his father. And he was kind of hinting to him, look, it's me, and look, I remember, not just that I remember what we last studied, but the teachings that you've given me and on all that we've studied is alive and well with me. I'm sticking to the program, I'm keeping to all the things. It's really me, I'm really your son, I'm really here. Anyways, so at that point, the Jacobson clan, they pack everything up, and now they're going to go down to Egypt. And on the way, Yaakov and family, and killed, they stop off in Beersheba. And he offers up sacrifices to God, praise and thanks and all that sort of stuff. And God appears to him and says, don't be afraid going down to Egypt. It's funny, Yaakov was apprehensive about two things. One, leaving Israel, and two, going down to Egypt. And God tells him, don't be afraid about going down to Egypt. I'm going to be with you, etc. You're going to go down. I'm going to make sure to bring you out, right? Because Yaakov was not buried in Egypt. He was buried in Israel, in the Holy Land. But he doesn't tell him, he doesn't soothe him about the fact that he left Israel. And also the commentary said that's intentional, because the fact that you will always be uncomfortable, that you're in exile, the fact that you're always going to be uncomfortable, that you're not in your home, is going to keep you awake and aware, and going to make sure you're not going to get too comfortable in exile, and that you're not always going to want to return home. As in that we should always want and desire to be in the land of Israel, and rule and be ruling ourselves, and the Messianic times and all that kind of stuff, to be freed from exile. It's also a side note, he brought down with him these acacia trees, because Yaakov foresaw that they would ultimately need them for the building of the temple in the desert. That we'll learn later when we say, where'd they get the wood from? This is where they got the wood from. He brought down acacia trees with him. It also says that when Yaakov went down, so the total number was 70. There were 70 people in the Jacobson clan. That includes his sons, his grandsons. It goes through the whole list. So these are the sons, these are their sons, and it mentions, two women are specifically mentioned. Some in text, I'm not. One is Serach bas Asher. She's the one that they say that when the news had to come to Yaakov that his son Yosef was still alive, they weren't just going to be like, hey, Dad, Joseph's alive. Instead, they wanted to tell him slowly, because he's a little bit, he wasn't exactly young at that point. So Serach, they say, played on her harp. She sang it to him musically in a pleasing kind of way. Say that she merited long life because of it. So she was alive, they say, during the redemption. She's a little bit while later, a few hundred years later. And then you also have Yocheved bas Levi. So Yocheved, the daughter of Levi, who they say was born at the entrance to Egypt. And that completes the number 70. And she is the mother of Moses. It's also interesting, a side note, from all of Yaakov's wives. Well, we know Rachel, we know Rachel already passed away, Leah had already passed away, and Zilpah had already passed away. The only one that was still alive now is Bilhah. One of the second, the maidservants who became a wife. She's the only one who's still married, who's still alive. Now it says they came down to Egypt. They were going to settle in a place called Goshen, which is the nicest of all of the place in Egypt of Egypt. And here also we have a verse that says, "Ves Yehuda shalach lefanav," that Yaakov sent Yehuda ahead of him. They sent Judah ahead of him. So commentaries, what does he send him ahead for? He sent him ahead to set up a yeshiva, set up a place of learning, because he knew the continuity of the Jewish people is dependent and reliant upon Jewish education. You gotta learn, you gotta study, so that you could pass it on, and so you could keep teaching it. Now, when they got down there, Yosef himself harnessed his chariot so he could go see his father, and they crying and embraces, etc. And then Yosef tells his brothers, okay, we're all gonna go now to meet Paro. We're gonna take the whole family now to meet him, but make sure to tell him that you're shepherds, that's what you want to do. And especially because the Egyptians worshipped like firstborn sheep, this will keep you separate from them, because they'll be like, okay, get them out of here, let them go settle in Goshen. We don't mind to be separate from them. There's actually different commentaries that say that Yosef only took 5 of his brothers with him, because he specifically, if he's coming to show Paro, like, hey, these are my brothers, he didn't want to show him the stronger brothers. He wanted to show the brothers that seemed a little bit weaker, so that Paro wouldn't look at them and be like, oh, I can use you in my army, right? He wanted to take the ones that Paro would be like, oh, nice to meet you, okay, go back to your shepherd. And there's different opinions who he took. It's either Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Issachar, and Benjamin, either them, or Gad, Naphtali, Dan, Zvulun, and Asher. It's like the same reason could be, the same reasoning of why he took these 5 could also have been used for these 5. So either it was a set of 5 that he took with him, specifically looking to bring the weaker brothers, so Paro wouldn't be like, you'll be in my army. And Paro agreed. They'll say, okay, you'll go study in Goshen. You'll settle in Goshen. Also, Yaakov meets Paro at that point, and Paro's like, hey, how you doing? By the way, how old are you? And we learn here, Yaakov is 130 years old at this point. And Yaakov also blesses Paro that when he goes out, he goes to the Nile, the banks will overflow to meet him. As in, he gives him a blessing now that the famine should be over. So even though his original dream was going to be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine, really there was only about 2 years of famine before the banks overflowed because of Yaakov's blessing. Now, the Parsha actually goes back a little bit now. The Torah portion kind of goes backwards a little bit, because it tells us, so what happened in those, by the way, what happened in those 2 years? So, what happened in those 2 years, that the famine got very severe, and all the grain, any grain that the Egyptians had set aside had gone bad. So they came to Yosef and like, hey, we need grain. Okay, we got to pay for it. So they came to the point where they gave all their money. They're like, we don't have any money left to buy stuff. Okay, we'll give you our livestock. We don't have any livestock left. Okay, we'll sell ourselves and our land. We'll sign it over to you, as in to Paro, and we'll all become serfs to Paro, as in like they sold themselves just to get that. And then they eventually, and also give us seed now so we could replant and all that sort of stuff. And it tells us here that they set up a tax, a fifth of everything they reaped and they harvested would go to Paro, because they were now his serfs, and that would be this 20% tax stayed. Now it also tells us that the children of Israel now settled in the land, they increased. Yosef took care of them, he provided for them, and they flourished. They were actually in a place called Ramses, which is, I guess, Ramses. There's storehouses, Pisam and Ramses, that the Jewish people built. Well, would have eventually built when they were enslaved. But that's where they settled. So Ramses, Goshen, and they flourished. And this is where this week's Torah portion ends off. And next week we wrap up the story of the Jacobson clan, which also wraps up the first book of the Torah before we get into the whole exile, etc.